This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast. Today, we're talking about mind hacking. And that's SPCZ with their track, The Fourth Mind, which I'm pretty sure that I heard in a chill out room of a rave that I went to in 1993. But that clearly is a topic of another podcast, because today we are talking about mind hacking, which is a new book by Sir John Hargrave that teaches you how to reprogram your mind the same way that you would, or I don't want to say the same way, it doesn't actually involve a keyboard, but in a similar concept to how you would reprogram a computer. Because really the mind is the seat of your entire reality. So getting control of your mind changes a lot. But more on this in a moment. First, let me introduce you to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast, welcome. I'm Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. A little bit about me, my background. I am trained as a marriage and family therapist and as a psychologist, and I'm a board certified life coach. Hence, love, happiness, and success. I have a few different ways to help my clients. I'm in private practice. I am the founder and director of Growing Self Counseling and Coaching, which is based out of Denver, although at this point we have clients all over the world because we do a lot of our work through on online medium, through Skype, FaceTime, Google Hangouts, and so forth. So if you're on the market for a good life coach, you can always get in touch with us. And I started doing this podcast a while back because I love my work. I love being a therapist and a coach, but I realized a long time ago that it's just such a tiny little percentage of the population that's ever going to actually pony up to come and see a therapist or a life coach like me or any of the other people in my practice. And there's a lot of need, just to have good, responsible information about kinds of things that can help you improve your life, improve your relationships, feel happier. And so that's why I started doing this podcast. Do you hear that? That's a tornado siren, and I'm in Colorado. I'm going to pause this for just 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, all is well. Yes, we here in Colorado take our tornado sirens seriously in the summertime on gray days, so I had to pause and make sure what was going on. They're just testing our tornado alarm equipment here in my town, so it's all good. But as you know, now I don't really edit the podcast, so we just roll with whatever happens. But anyway, I was talking about the purpose of the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast is to hopefully bring you good and science-based information when you need it. That's another thing that's very important to me, is to have it based on evidence and research as opposed to just my opinions. So the things that we talk about on the show are all stuff that hopefully you can trust. And along those lines, I'm also pleased to report that over the last, while, I have been developing an online program for you that is, I'm super proud of it. It doesn't take the place of therapy, but it's the best of what I teach my clients in therapy about how to be happy people. Again, it's all evidence-based. It teaches you how to get control of your mind, which is what we're going to be talking about with Sir John Hargrave today, to really be able to manage your mood from the inside out. Teaches you how to have a happy mind, a happy body, how to manage your emotions in a healthy way and have a happy heart, and lastly, how to have a happy life, really getting clear about your priorities and doing the things that will help you create authentic happiness in your life. It is called called the Happiness Class, and I designed it for people who, again, might not be ready to pony up and do, serious for real therapy or coaching, but who really want some help and guidance and feel like they have some things to learn and some growth to do. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can actually take the first class for free, which is very helpful in itself. It really piggybacks a lot on what Sir John and I are going to be talking about today of how to begin to get control of what is going on in your mind, learning how to identify unhelpful thoughts and shift them into much more productive ways of thinking that will help you get better results and feel better. So if you want to learn more about that, go to my website, which is growingself.com, growingself.com, and you'll see sign-up boxes that will take you to the first free class, which you can do right this very second if you want. So also, if you're on the website, you can get in touch with me. I love getting emails from my listeners. I do these podcasts to be helpful for you. So if there are topics that you would enjoy hearing about, let me know what they are. And I make these to order. So let me know what you'd like to hear about. You can also connect with me on Facebook. Let's see. Dr. Lisa Bobby on Facebook or on Twitter at Dr. Lisa Bobby. And then last but not least, as a personal favor, if you like this podcast, subscribe to it on iTunes. You'll see links on my website to be able to do that because the more people subscribe, the more people will be able to find this podcast on the iTunes search rankings. And if you're feeling extremely inspired, if you wanted to write a review, I would be very, very grateful. So thank you. Okay, so enough about me. Let's talk about mind hacking with Sir John Hargrave. Sir John, thank you so much for meeting with me today on the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast and sharing your wonderful book and amazing ideas with my listeners. Hello.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Lisa. I'm excited.
This is fun. Well, I'm just thrilled to have you on the show because you've written a really amazing book. It's called Mindhacking. And, as part of my profession, it's sort of my responsibility to read a lot of self-help books and kind of stay on top of what's happening in the self-help literature. And so I read a lot of them. And yours stood out to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, the information is wonderful and it's very grounded in a lot of scientific research. I mean, cognitive therapy, mindfulness, like you have really good stuff, but it's also funny. I laughed out loud several times as I was reading it, and you're able to explain these concepts in a way that is just really enjoyable to read. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you to say. They say when you're writing a book, write the book that you've always wanted to read. And, I've also read a lot of self-help, and usually it has like flowers or galloping horses on the cover, and I wanted to write something that was just totally different. So there is no silhouette of the Buddha on the cover of this. It's really a funny, entertaining, very practical look at how to reprogram your mind, kind of a user manual for the mind.
I love it. And thank you very much for saving us for another, serene picture of a Buddha or, river stones or something. So, but it's wonderful. And you've really written it, in the language of computer programming. And the central theme of this book is that your mind can be reprogrammed. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, we all carry around devices nowadays. We all have a screen in front of us at all times, and we all understand there's this world inside our computers that's kind of has its own type of reality. It's not like our physical reality, but it's still real. And our minds are the same way. So computers give us a great metaphor for looking at our minds, because our minds are real in the sense that they drive everything we do. They drive our emotions and our thoughts and our actions. But at the same time, they're not real in the same way this physical universe is real. So by looking at computers and how we can debug faulty programs, how a programmer reprograms a computer, we can also learn to reprogram our minds. And that's what mind hacking is all about.
That is fabulous. Well, I mean, really going back to that concept of neuroplasticity, that our brains are not fixed and the things that we believe very much do create our reality, but that you can change those things intentionally. I thought did such a great job of walking people step by step through that process. And so I want you to talk a little bit more about that process. But first of all, we cannot go one moment further until you answer a burning question. Your title is Sir John Hargrave. And so when we were first talking, I sincerely expected you to be of like English peerage, maybe some kind of a duke. Tell me more about how you came to be called Sir John Hargrave.
Yeah, well, I'm not really a knight, Dr. Lisa. I wrote the Queen of England a few years ago, and I said, Your Majesty, I would like to be knighted. Because I thought it sounded a lot classier.
It really does.
Right? I get invited to more like formal events. So the Queen wrote me back, and she said, we have to do something noble. I was like, well, that's a lot of work. So I went down to my local county courthouse, and for a small fee, you can pay to have your name legally changed, and you go before a judge, and it's that simple. So here I am before you today, Sir John Hargrave, kind of a name hack, if you will.
Truly. But you know what? It does get one's attention. And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in the courtroom on that day when you were explaining to the judge. Did you get a reaction from them, or were they just like...
Yeah, definitely. It was interesting, but here I am.
That's hilarious. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story, and also educating my listeners on your correct name here. So, okay, back to our topic. So you did a beautiful job of laying out mind hacking as a process. So what's the first step if you want to rewrite what's going on in your head?
The first step is really to become aware of our minds. We use the analogy in the book of a movie theater. So when you go into the movies, at the beginning, like during the trailers, everybody's cracking jokes. And even at the beginning of the movie, you might be analyzing the music or the actors. But then if it's a good movie, you get lost in it, right? You just get wrapped up in it. That's the point of a movie. And our minds are the same way, where all day long we are wrapped up in this movie called our mind. And the idea is that you don't have to believe everything you think. In other words, even though there's that movie going on, you don't have to believe everything your mind is telling you. And what we can learn to do in mind hacking, the first step is to step out of the movie, to basically begin directing our own movie. And that requires a series of exercises or techniques, we call them hacks, to step back from your mind, step outside your mind so you can see it on a day-to-day basis.
That you can't change what you're not aware of.
Yeah.
And people can really just fall down this rabbit hole of stuff that's happening in their head. And it feels so real. And it's very easy to time travel. My clients and I talk a lot about time traveling, where you experience yourself living in the future. You have all these anticipated things that are going to happen. And in that moment, when you're not aware you're even thinking, they feel so real, and they can really impact the way you think and feel and the things you do in the present moment. So self-awareness is really key. And now, we talk about self-awareness a lot in meditation and mindfulness practice, but you talk about it differently. You talk about it as being concentration training. So, and I love what you described as being like a Jedi in Star Wars. So what's the difference between concentration training and meditation?
Yeah, so they're very similar, and I've been practicing this form of meditation for 20 years, and it's just made huge changes in my life. The difference is we kind of gamify it, so we turn it into a video game. So the basic concentration exercise is that you spend 20 minutes in the morning focusing on your breath, single point of focus or concentration, and when you notice your mind wandering, when you notice yourself lost in thoughts, as you just said, time traveling, thinking about the past or the future, you award yourself a point. We call them awareness points, and you keep track of your points. And so in traditional meditation, you feel kind of bad when you notice your mind wandering. But with this, you get a little dopamine hit because you're like, oh, that was a success. I noticed my mind and returned it back to my breath, the point of concentration. Yeah, so it changes it up and makes it more rewarding for you.
That's cool. Okay. Well, I like the way that you used, positive reinforcement to help keep people on task, as opposed to, chastising them for their natural monkey minds. So that's cool. Wonderful. And now, does that practice in itself help people improve their focus, or do you recommend something else for just being able to stay on task in short term or long term?
Well, the book is full of hacks or techniques to help improve focus, but that really is the foundation of that concentration training. And there's a lot of research, as you know, Lisa, about the proven benefits of meditation or concentration training. Everything from clarity of mind to even better relationships to even improved physical health. So, as you said, we really try to get to the science behind these and not just make it kind of self-help pop, ideas, but basically grounded in real research.
And I so appreciated that because, there is so much good research that is genuinely helpful to people, and
Yeah.
not to put anybody else's stuff down. And there are an awful lot of books that are really just based on people's opinions, very charismatic people's opinions
Yeah.
of what things work, or what worked for them. And so I really appreciated the way that you grounded it in fact, and also that you incorporated so many really interesting historical stories about people who throughout the course of history have been examples of this in action, using that to demonstrate. So I found it to be very interesting, just intellectually. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one good example of that is with the concept of visualization. And so, the sort of pop psychology is, well, if you visualize your goals, you're more likely to achieve them. But there's a great study where they had two groups of students. One group, they said, just visualize getting good grades at the end of this class. And another group, they said, visualize the process of getting to a good grade. So in other words, the second group had to simulate the whole process. So studying, saying no to a friend who might ask them to go to a party, taking the test and then getting the good grades. And consistently, the students who did the simulation process scored much higher, like a full letter grade higher on their final test. So that idea of simulation instead of visualization, seeing yourself going through the whole process of getting to your goal, is what we recommend as one of our mind hacks.
Yeah, powerful stuff. And so I want to talk to you more in detail about some of your specific mind hacks. But first of all, you talk a lot in your book about the need to debug your mind, going back again to that sort of computer programming term, that when computers aren't working properly, there's a bug in the system. Can you tell my listeners a little bit more about how you conceptualize bugs of the mind?
Yeah, so the first thing we need to do is look for areas of pain in our life. So anytime something's just not going as well as you would like, or areas of friction, and it's usually pretty easy to identify these. And we know that at the root of that, there's some faulty thinking, there's some buggy thinking. And the goal is to really figure out, how do we get down to that core belief, we call them thought loops, that is driving that problem or that pain in my life. One of the techniques we use is called 5 whys, and this comes from Sakichi Toyoda, who was the founder of what's now the Toyota Motor Company. So he was a manufacturing genius, and he said, whenever there's a problem on our manufacturing floor, you don't just fire the employee who was responsible, you ask the question why 5 times. So you keep asking why until you get to the root problem, the core problem that caused that. And I think we can do the same thing with our minds, continually asking why until we get down to that root problem thought. You must do something like that with your clients as well, don't you, Dr. Lisa?
Very much so. That oftentimes people are struggling with a sort of reactive fear or an assumption, and to be able to ask, okay, so what does that mean to you? Why is that a problem? What would be the worst part about that? And really helping them unpack their fears or their core beliefs to try to get to that central issue. And in doing so, that can be extremely helpful. I really liked some of the examples that you used about that in your book. And one of the things that you write about very entertainingly, again, I might add, even though it is, a very serious subject, was your own struggles with overcoming substance abuse and drinking in particular. Would you be willing to share with our listeners how that process worked in your own life of uncovering those whys and those core beliefs, or other people that you have worked with in practice, so that they can start thinking about what it might look like if they were to apply it to their own situation?
Yeah. I start out the book actually with a story of my own personal low, which was when the Secret Service showed up on my doorstep. And Lisa, when the Secret Service shows up and comes in your living room, that's probably a good indicator that something's going wrong in your life.
It means something. Would it be giving too much away if you told my listeners why the Secret Service was at your house?
Well, I don't want to give away the whole story.
Okay.
But, suffice it to say that was a real wake-up call for me, and that was really the beginning of my journey to sobriety. So it was about 8 years ago. And I've been sober ever since. But one of the hardest things when you're getting sober, or when you're trying to change any kind of habit or pattern in your life, whether that's finding, success or relationship happiness or losing weight, the mind is one of the most difficult things to deal with. I like to say your mind can be your worst enemy, or it can be your best friend. And so that idea of the mind, managing my mind as I was trying to get sober, that night I threw away all of the alcohol and drugs that I had in the house. And that process of throwing them away, the little hack I used on my mind was just to focus literally on the muscle movement of throwing all these liquor bottles in this dumpster. Because if I thought about it, if I allowed my mind to think, it would tell me, like, what are you doing? You're crazy. Like, you're giving away everything that's fun in your life. But if I just focused on the muscle movement, literally one movement or one step at a time, I was able to get through it. So that was kind of my first mind hack.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, staying in the present to a whole other level of just really focusing on what is my body doing in this moment in order to protect yourself really from what your mind might have done otherwise, which in a very powerful way for most people is to absolutely disrupt what they're doing and say, no, and re-trick them into believing all of the things that it's trying to tell them about. Your life is going to be horrible if you do this. You're never going to have any fun again, and so on and so forth. So that's an amazing strategy. And I love the way that you described it.
Yeah, staying in the present. It's a good way of summing it up. But yeah, you're right. Your mind is sometimes like an annoying friend, who's like, what are you doing? That's just like, somebody who's not out to help you. Exactly. But you can turn it around. That's the fun of it, is that you really can make your mind like a well-trained pet. Where it really does start to work with you, and you can be best buds.
Yeah. Well, and you tell such a cool story that I hadn't heard before, about somebody who was able to do that and take it to a whole new level. And that was Steve Jobs. And the way that you describe his mental abilities is that he was actually able to create a reality distortion field that he sort of lived in. And just the power of his mind to shape reality around it was pretty amazing. So tell us a little bit more about that idea of the reality distortion field.
Steve Jobs' coworkers described him as having this reality distortion field, and I have to emphasize that these were engineers and geeks. These were not like mystical new age woo-woo folks. And they said that when you went into a room with him, you might go in totally convinced that you would not be able to meet some deadline. And when you came out of the meeting, you would be totally convinced that not only was it possible, but you were going to do it. And they were aware of this power that he had. And they even talked about ways to shield themselves from it. Like, careful, you're going to fall into the Jobs distortion field.
Did it involve aluminum foil hats?
Yeah, that would have been awesome. Like a Jiffy Pop thing. But at any rate, it was a belief in what he wanted that was so strong, it was as if it had the power to affect the minds of other people. And I believe that we all have within us our own potential for our own reality distortion field. When we believe something is possible for us, and when we believe in that so strongly, then we do begin to radiate that, or we begin to somehow give off that vibe that this is going to be a thing. It's going to actually be who I am. And over time, if we practice that with consistency, it becomes who we are. And here's a quick story. I used to be really bad around people. I was very self-conscious when I talked to people. I would always feel like I was just self-conscious, like am I standing up straight? And then I realized that I had this negative loop going on in my head that was like, you're no good with people. And so I said, I'm going to reprogram that with a positive loop. And the positive loop is just going to be, I'm good with people. That's it. So whenever I'd talk with people and I'd start to catch myself thinking, you're no good, you're awkward, you have a piece of kale in your teeth, I would say to myself, I'm good with people. And repeating that hundreds and thousands of times over a course of months and years, it turns out I actually am kind of good with people now. So there's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in all of this. Don't you think, Lisa?
I know it. And, what you're describing is so important because really you were able to create emotional safety inside of yourself. Because what I experience a lot is when people have negative or scary core beliefs that, people hate me, I'm terrible with people, I'm going to embarrass myself. Your feeling brain, the part of your brain that feels emotions, cannot differentiate very well between the things that you think about and what is actually happening. And so when you envision having some kind of catastrophic social experience, it actually kicks your body into fight or flight mode. So you start shaking and you stop thinking very clearly and you start acting like a weirdo. And in that way, your body responds to the things that you're thinking about. But what you did, I'm good with people. That I can only imagine brought such a sense of felt safety to you where you were soothed, you were calm, you were confident, your brain was working at, optimum functioning because you weren't scared. And really in doing so, you created your own reality. And I love to hear you talk about it in this way because, and again, no disrespect for people's belief systems, but, over the last decade or so, there's been a lot around manifestation, and we create our own reality by our thoughts. And I think that that's true, but what you're describing is an actual scientific process to creating it, which is when you can intentionally create core beliefs and then you act that way. You start shaping your reality through your actions and through your behaviors, as opposed to having some kind of, ripples in the space-time continuum that, universal, I don't know. And that might be true too. I don't have any evidence one way or the other, but what you're describing is much easier and I think more scientifically based, is that people have a lot more power over creating their reality than they oftentimes think they do.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you make that distinction. So this idea of manifestation, that if I think about something, it's going to happen. Well, it doesn't always happen. And
No.
We go to great pains in the book to describe that it will happen if you do the work to make it happen. So it's funny, if you want to become a billionaire, you can do that. And telling yourself you can do it is absolutely the first part. So in that sense, I really do agree with that idea. However, you also have to actually do the work, right? A Brinks truck is not going to back up to your door and unload $1 billion. And so you've got to make a plan to figure out how you're going to get there. And that's why the whole last third of the Mindhacking book is all about, well, how do we now take these positive thought loops and put them into action in the real world? In other words, laying the groundwork in your mind is absolutely key first. So like I just said, that, positive thought loop of I'm good with people. But then you've got to go out and find opportunities to mingle with people and to get practice at doing that. And it's not going to be easy at first, and you are going to fail. But if you keep doing it and you persist and you keep telling yourself I'm good with people, then over time you are much more likely to actually be good with people.
Absolutely. You're not just rewriting your own script, but you are practicing being different and acting as if. So, well, I really want to get into some of your mind hacking techniques because they're so simple yet powerful and doable. And I think my listeners would really benefit from hearing about them. But, one thing that occurred to me as I was reading, the mind hacks kind of range, and some of them are as simple as simply writing things down and using repetition to change your brain structures, which is wonderful, and things that I often recommend to my clients. But you cited stories about some people, in particular one historical figure, Napoleon Hill, who was able to use a very powerful imaginative process to actually imagine that he was sitting around the table with these historical counselors, like including Abraham Lincoln, and taking guidance from these people as a way of being able to tap into his own wisdom and truths. But I was thinking, wow, that really takes a lot of imagination. Do you feel that that's a requirement, or is that something that some people are better at than others? I guess what I'm asking is, will all people be able to use all of these mind hacks equally well, or are some things going to be easier for some people than others?
Sure. So think of mind hacking as like a toolbox. And some of the tools people are going to be like, oh, that made all the difference for me, and I use that tool all the time. And some of them are like, I tried it, didn't really work. But and that's definitely the feedback we've gotten from the thousands of beta testers who've made this mind hacking movement really take off. The Napoleon Hill technique, he called it the invisible counselors. And the idea was that, as you said, he had these great men. They were all men. Sorry, he was a little sexist, but all men around this table, this large conference table, and he would invite them there in his mind, and he would turn over his problems, his personal problems. And he had, as you said, Abraham Lincoln and many other great statesmen and businessmen. And then he would ask them their opinions, and he found that each of them had their own personalities. So like Lincoln would arrive late, and then he would like solemnly walk around with his hands behind his back. Sometimes they would get in arguments with each other. And it grew so real and so vivid that he actually stopped doing it because he kind of thought he was losing his mind. So I have found that very helpful in terms of when I'm having problems to imagine some great leader or teacher to say, how would you deal with this situation? I don't believe that I'm communicating telepathically with them, but I do believe that there's a part of me that already has the answer, and it's a very useful tool for finding the answer myself. And plus, it's just fun to talk with Yoda.
Absolutely. But that we all have different parts and personalities inside of ourselves, but to have a concrete way of tapping into that wisdom, I could see how that would be very powerful. Yoda is on your inner council, I take it.
Yeah, and I guess he's a guy too, right? I think Yoda was a man. It was never really clear, though, was it? There was never a Mrs. Yoda. I don't know.
That's interesting. No Yoda kidlets. So anyway.
I don't think.
Oh.
How would those emerge anyway? Would they be in eggs or I don't know?
Mushrooms, yeah.
It'd be fungi that would just be laid into the damp earth, his home planet.
Oh, too funny. Cool. So then now let's talk about how to put mind hacking into practice. So say I come to you and say, Sir John, I want to start a business. I want to write a book. I want to do something amazing, but I don't know. How can this help me? What would you say?
Well, I think, first of all, as we said, there's this idea of becoming aware of your own mind. That's really the first step. And there's a number of hacks there to help you develop that skill of mental awareness. The second step is to debug the negative thought loops that might be holding you back. So in other words, if you haven't achieved these things already, well then, what is it that's holding you back? And what is that faulty programming? And again, we have a number of techniques like the 5 whys hack that we talked about to get to the root of that problem thinking. Once you've identified that, then you can rewrite that positive loop in a way that's going to drive you forward. So like my story of, I'm not good with people. And then my positive loop became, I'm good with people. So what is that thing you want to achieve? And in my experience, that's the part that most people get hung up on is, what do you want? And
Yeah.
most people just really have never articulated what it is that they want out of their life. It's very easy for all of us to say what we don't want, like the irritants in our life are very easy to identify. But figuring out what it is you want is much more difficult. And that's why we place such an emphasis on writing things down, because when you write down what it is that you want, there's a kind of power that comes from that now you can see it. It's actually in this physical world. And ultimately, that's where you want to get things, is out of your head and into your hands, out of the mind and into the real world. So writing down that positive thought loop is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually something that I work with my clients a lot, because many times, the unhelpful, or to use your language, buggy thoughts can be very triggering emotionally. And what happens is that people start catastrophizing, and they really get stuck on the bad things that could happen or the things that they don't want. And it's really hard for them to see anything else. And the act of writing, really neurologically, it shifts your brain activity from the right side of your brain, where you're imagining all these terrible outcomes and really feeling a lot of emotions, to the left side of your brain, which, because you are encoding these ideas into language and using having to create letters physically, like with your hand and a pen. And it really helps people take a lot of the emotional energy out of their scary ideas, makes them feel much more manageable, but also it changes something in your brain. I mean, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but I mean, when people write things down, they remember so much better. They retain more of the information, as opposed to just thinking about something. To write is really to make it real in a lot of ways. And I was so pleased to see you emphasize that point in your book. I think that's such a simple strategy, but one that is really often overlooked.
Yeah, there's also this idea of breaking the loop. So those things you're talking about with your clients is like this self-referential loop, that I'm scared about something and then I start to obsess on it. And the more I obsess, the more scared I feel. And so you're right, that does start to suck your energy, and we can consume a lot of our spare computer cycles, our processing power, on those negative loops. And what this book intends to do, and the work that you do with your clients and your great podcast and your videos, is stop those loops. In other words, kind of hit the Control-Alt-Delete, break the loops, and then start to form new positive loops where you're putting yourself in a positive direction, saying, okay, I can achieve this thing, and here's what I'm going to do today. And then every time you achieve that little step in that direction, you get more energy and more of a sort of impetus or momentum to get the positive loop going in the right direction. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. Yep. And Tony Robbins would approve. Just that idea of breaking the pattern and doing something different intentionally, I think is worth so much. Well, I am excited to be able to start referring my clients to this book. I often use a lot of bibliotherapy in my practice. So my clients are oftentimes reading books, and we come back into sessions for counseling or coaching, and we talk about it, and really putting into practice the ideas. So when can I start sending them out to the bookstore to pick up a copy of Mindhacking?
You can send them out in January 2016. They can actually order it right now, pre-order it from Amazon. So they'll get it the instant it's released, or earlier.
Fabulous.
But in the meantime, you can also download a free preview copy of the book at mindhacky.ng. So that's like mind hacking with a .ng, no .com. And we're really releasing it as kind of an open source project, because we are really growing this mind hacking movement, and we also want to make this available to as many people as possible. We're inventing kind of a science of self-improvement.
I love it. Well, I will be sure to include those links in the show notes for today's show. So if anybody needs to get to that, you can go to, what was the website again, John? Say it one more time.
Mindhacky.ng. So mindhacking with a .ng.
Okay. And of course, also go to growingself.com and to the blog and podcast section. And when you find the article for this show, there will be a link to all of Sir John's stuff as well. So, Sir John Hargrave, thank you so much for speaking to me about your wonderful book. I think it's fabulous. I think it's destined to be a classic. I do.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on the podcast. This was a lot of fun, Lisa.
Yeah, for me as well. Thank you.